Good evening, everyone. I'm going to start with tonight's proceedings. In this week's parasha, we are told how Abraham mourns Sarah, his wife. It says, Lispod le Sarah veliv kota, that Abraham eulogized Sarah and cried for her. Rav Soloveitchik says on this that eulogizing refers to a logical judgment, a verbal objectification through words, whilst crying is indicative to a spontaneous, overwhelming, and uncontrollable grief. The natural order with death is that you first cry and then you eulogize. However, Abraham understood his personal loss. With Sarah, Abraham discovered God. Together, they forged a new morality, handed over a communal tradition, and educated the next generation. As a community, we have all cried, but this evening is for us to be involved in the eulogizing, in the reflecting, commemorating, and internalizing the very messages of what the late Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs would have wanted from us, carrying out that Abrahamic and Saraic message. The speakers this evening will Be'ezrat Hashem reflect this sentiment, as each of them had a very close relationship with the late Chief Rabbi. I'd first like Rabbi Dweck to share his thoughts with us tonight. Just hold on a moment. I just want to highlight your screen. Rabbi Dweck, yes. Okay. Spotlight video. Bechavod.
Thank you, Rabbi Amir. And with the permission of the esteemed rabbis that are here tonight on the platform as well, it is always my great honor and pleasure to speak to our community in Manchester. I just deeply regret that tonight is under such sad and distressful circumstances. I know that for all of us, the last days have been terribly painful, surreal even, and we're all struggling in our ways to accommodate and absorb this terrible blow that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us. And I say it that way because it is essentially the way that we experience it. There is little that I can say that has not been said already. But I want to share with the Kahal these things that I was thinking on this morning. And then I will end with something that I have said, but I feel to be, to me anyway, and in my connection and relationship with the Rav, that I felt was most meaningful and significant. The first is the Ramchal. In the beginning of the Mesilat Yesharim, there were two versions that the Ramchal wrote. He wrote one version in dialogue form between a Hacham and a Hasid, and he wrote one version in just presentation form through chapters. The only version that we have in his handwriting, his own manuscript, is the dialogue version, which almost no one studies. It's put out by Machon Ofek, and I encourage, if anyone is interested, they should look for it. And in this dialogue between the Hacham and the Hasid is the one leading the dialogue ultimately. It doesn't begin that way, but the tables turn, and the Hasid begins to speak to the Hacham. And he says to the Hacham about Hachamim, he says, look, the reality is most people are not deeply educated. At least when it's their own desire to do so, people will not throw themselves into education. And those that do, he says, will do so often superficially. And even those that do it deeply, not just superficially, that immerse themselves into the study, they do so because they like the study, because the study itself isn't enough for them. And then says the Ramchal, through the voice of the Hasid, there is a special, elite, unique group that you could barely even call a group. And those are the people who immerse themselves deep into the waters of study because they know that it is their service to God. And that through their consciousness and awareness and learning, they serve their God, they achieve their own wholeness, and they enhance the world. And I couldn't help, of course, but by reading that this morning, think of Rabbi Sachs. Because we know, and everyone will say, that his intellect was great. And indeed it was. No one requires us to say that. It was self-evident. But one thing that was evident and that could be overlooked is that his entire endeavor in all of his study was for God. He sought his entire life to serve his Maker. And it motivated everything that he did. All the books that he wrote, all the speeches that he gave, all the hours and hours. See, we didn't see that part. The part that was in the making, the hours of reading, of thought, of study, of working through, of toil, of what we would call amal, the toil of Torah. That we didn't see. We only saw the outcomes. We saw the output of it. The hours, the toil, the energy, the motivation. We think that it came easy to him. There's no question that he was blessed. But I've known minds and I've known minds. And to fill the mind and then to put out from the mind is toil. And the Rav worked tirelessly till his last to do so for his God. And giving it to us was his service of God and the people that God loves, Am Yisrael. People say that his voice was prophetic. And I believe that that is more than simply an analogy. Harambam, in the Moreh Nebuchim, he lists levels of prophecy. And he says, while it is that we do not have prophecy today anymore, the first and initial stage of prophecy is this, and please listen. Harambam writes that the first and initial stage of prophecy is that when a human being is pushed, motivated, where there is an inability in the human being's capacity to sit still, but is constantly moved and motivated to do for the people. That is the first level of prophecy. And he writes that Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, had that since he reached puberty, since he came of age. That never stopped in him. And I think that when we say Rabbi Sachs had a prophetic voice, I mean, that is not something that we say for most people. I think it's us feeling that level of prophecy in him. He was tireless. He never stopped giving to us, teaching us, speaking for us, representing us in the best possible light. We're represented better through the words and eloquence of Rabbi Sachs than we have been in centuries by anyone. And that is not an exaggeration if you think about it. I'm not talking about just talking within, I'm talking about speaking the name of the people of Israel to the world. There is no match. And finally, I will say, and this is what I've said before, and I will say it again, and I will continue to say it because I think it is the most important part. When one speaks, one must draw from what one knows. And Rabbi Sacks's knowledge was vast and deep. But to choose what to say, at what time, to whom, in what way, is a unique ability. And at times you make it, and at times you miss the mark. Rabbi Sacks, every single time, he drew from his vast knowledge and the depths of his study, and he hit the note every single time. And what's important for us to realize about that is that does not happen in the mind. That happens through the heart, because it's the heart that feels and it's the heart that connects. And Rabbi Sacks served God and the people with his heart. And his heart subsumed his mind. And he brought his thought out and his words out through his heart. And that is why, and I'm sure you've had this experience in listening to him, that when you heard him speak, you were first moved. You first felt. And it might have taken you some time to absorb what exactly he said. But you know that it really meant a lot to you, and that your heart was lifted by it, and that you were prouder after he had spoken. And the reason why that happened first is because he spoke with his heart first. And the words came through that heart to ours. As the Hachamim say, Devarim hayotzim min halev nichnasim el halev. Things that come out from the heart enter the heart. And he did that every single time. People don't realize that about the Rav always. They know that he was a towering mind, but they take for granted that when he spoke to you, he spoke always perfectly to you. His words always hit right there. And that doesn't happen by simply being a towering scholar. It happens by pouring your heart before God and by humbling your heart to its service. And that the Rav did. And we were all deeply blessed for being able to see him with our eyes and to hear him as we did. And if you had the great fortune of hearing him in person, you will be asked, what was it like to hear Rabbi Sacks speak before you? And it will be a mitzvah to tell people, because it will be a reverberation from that special heart that God chose to speak to his people and for his people on behalf of his people. We will miss him a great deal. But what we can do is we can continue to study his words and to open our hearts to his teachings. Yehi zichro baruch.
Amen. Thank you. We're going to have Rabbi Levy tonight, but he isn't feeling so great, but he has passed us a video of him, and I'm going to share with you his message to us. Just hold on a moment.
Having been in the rabbinate for over 60 years, that I have to say a few words about a much younger person. It was 43, 44 years ago when Jonathan was still in his late 20s. That I started something called the Young Jewish Leadership Institute. This was the first attempt in Anglo-Jewry to teach adult Jewish education at university level. We made a an arrangement with the Hebrew University, who sent us top professors to lecture at the Young Jewish Leadership Institute. But the one who was the most popular was Jonathan, who was then in his late 20s. And whenever we went to Lordy Road for the lectures, there was Jonathan, a young man, not even 30 yet, captivating the audience much more than any other professor from the Hebrew University. I did a lot of work with him also at Jews College, now LSJS. And there again, we worked together, and I realized how much he would be giving to the Anglo-Jewish community. I then said to him, look, we've got to train rabbis. The Montefiore Endowment is going to do this. Will you do it with me? And I must tell you that every single rabbi that the Montefiore Endowment has given semicha to was signed by Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. That is the support he gave to us. And it was not only professional. I officiated at some of his children's weddings, and he officiated at Julian and Sean's wedding. And therefore, I always will refer to him as the chief rabbi of the English-speaking world. He had captured the English-speaking world.
Thank you. I'm now going to call upon Rabbi Dr. Raphael Zarum. Sorry. Rabbi Dr. Raphael Zarum. Rabbi Zarum is the current dean of LSJS, the place that Rabbi Sachs had for years and years been the principal, closely connected with the institution, and both of them had a very, very close relationship together. Bechavod.
Thank you, Rabbi Elitov, and good evening, everybody, and to the Rabbanim that are here. My heart is broken, and it's a very sad time. And we mourn. Many of us Talmidim and Talmidot from around the world have been mourning, but we have to share and talk about him, and I will make every effort to do so tonight. I'll begin with two stories. Rabbi Dweck taught us so truthfully just now that Rabbi Sachs, my Rebbe, spoke with a prophetic voice, and that's true. But I want to tell you that there was another aspect of him that's also prophetic, in that he lived the life in some ways of our prophets. And if you know about the lives of Yeshayahu and Yirmiyahu, Yechezkel, and the others prophets, they had a difficult time. The community didn't always understand the true life of a prophet, that even with the challenge, they continue. So let me tell you two stories, one light, one to make you smile, and one to break your heart. The first one was actually a Shabbaton when I was quite young, in my 20s, and he very often loved to be around young people. And we organized a special Shabbaton in St. John's Wood, just 25 young people with Rabbi Sachs, eating together, learning Torah together. And it was Parashat Tetzaveh. And just that week, some fool had challenged an issue of his and been very rude about him in the press. And we were aware of it, and obviously no one talked about it. But he knew that we knew. And I don't know if you know about Parshat Tetzaveh. The reason it's unique is because it's the description of the Mishkan. And Truma, it talks about all the objects that have to be in the tabernacle, the Mishkan. And in Tetzaveh, it talks about the job of the Kohanim. And as a result, it doesn't mention Moshe Rabbeinu's name. It's the only Sedra from Shemot onwards that doesn't mention his name. So Rabbi Sachs got up to speak to us, and he said, why is Moshe's name not mentioned in this week's Sedra? And he looked at us and he said, sometimes it's good not to be in the papers. And only a leader who everything they did was watched by the entire community and was questioned and challenged and prodded and unpacked by the community would know that kind of Torah to feel, to know what it felt like to be Moshe Rabbeinu. And yet it never daunted him, and he kept on going. Let me give an example of, for me, his greatness. That all his accolades and achievements were not for him. They were always an opportunity to do more for Am Yisrael. Let me give you an example. For many months, my job as the head of the college is to teach and also to raise money for the college. For many months, I'd been courting a particular person to give a big donation, and they hadn't answered, and it was a problem. And then it was a Sunday, and there was a funeral from a very important person in the community, and Rabbi Sachs was there, and he was being with the family, being very open and warm with them. Was very incredible. But then just before the event began, and he'd always do this, by the way, because we're all plutzing, worrying what's happening next with this organization, but he was always very calm. And he called me over and he said the following. He said, Rafi, what happened in the JC yesterday? And in the Jewish Chronicle that week, they'd done one of these top 100 Jews, top 100 this. And again, Rabbi Sachs had been named the #1 Jew in our community. Of course. So he says to me, he says, Rafi, you saw what happened in the JC yesterday. The person you've been asking money for phoned me Motzei Shabbat to wish me Mazel Tov. And I spoke to him. Phone him tomorrow and you'll get your donation. And I phoned him the next day and I did. Rabbi Sachs's first thought when he was given a kavod was not, look at me, look what I've achieved. It was, how can I make this good for our community? How can I turn into something that will grow, that will increase chinuch, that will increase Torah, that will develop our kehillah? And I always saw that about him. All these honors that he got, he turned them to be useful, to be for the good. Now, let me tell you a little bit of history of him. You'll read many stories about him, his origins, and Rabbi Rosenfeld maybe tell us some as well, because he goes way back. But my knowledge of him and my understanding of the man is that he was a spiritual, restless seeker. A seeker, as Rabbi Dweck said, for God. He wasn't brought up so religious, but after the 6-day war and the wake-up call of what it meant to be a Jew in the state of Israel, he went on a journey to America on a Greyhound bus and went to meet the great religious leaders, and thus begun his spiritual journey. And he traveled for many years trying to understand, getting more religious, learning more Torah, learning philosophy as well. But he was a seeker. Now, you might know, my background actually is Yemenite, is Temani. I'm a big fan of the Rambam, just as Rabbi Dweck is. And so I've read through many parts of his works. And he, in the beginnings of the laws of idolatry, Hilchot Avodat Kochavim, Mazalot, he talks about how Abraham came to find God. It's incredible. It's meant to be a book of halacha, the Mishnah Torah, these halachot, but he spends over a chapter describing how Abraham found God. When I first was taught this, I was told, you see, Abraham believed in God, therefore you should believe in God. But that teacher of mine was very young and didn't understand. And when I got older, I realized, no, why does the Rambam tell us step by step how Avraham Avinu found HaKadosh Baruch Hu? You know why? Because it's a role model. The Rambam was telling us, just like Avraham found God and searched for God, so must you. The first of the 10 commandments doesn't just happen. It's like the 5th commandment, honor your parents, or keep Shabbat. Does that just happen? You tick, yes, I honor my parents. Every day when you talk to them, every day when you treat them in a certain way, that will define if you had kavod for them. And it's the same with every Shabbat. And it's the same with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not, I believe, I don't believe. It's a journey, it's a search to see, to feel in our hearts and our minds, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God in our lives. That's what Avraham was the model for. And that's what the Rambam wrote about. And as you know, Rabbi Sachs's hero was the Rambam. And that's what Rabbi Sachs did. He searched, and he began in political philosophy, his background. But as he got more religious and grew, he moved into moral philosophy and looked at the purpose of life, why we are here. And there's a famous drawing he had actually in his house, because he was always thought of as, was he an academic or was he really a rabbi? Was he Professor Jonathan or was he Rabbi Sachs? Did he prefer to be in the ivory tower of the university or in the pulpit in the heart of the community? And people didn't know, and they were stretched. Which one is he really? Which one is he really? And they made the same mistake about the Rambam, about Maimonides, because Maimonides famously wrote the greatest book of Jewish philosophy and the greatest book of Jewish law. The great book of Jewish philosophy was the book of the Halacha is Mishnah Torah, which I quoted earlier, and the Shulchan Aruch is very much based on the Mishnah Torah. And people debated, which is the real Rambam? Is it the halachist, the legal advisor, or the philosopher? And the academics all say, he's really a philosopher. The deep book is the Mind of Ruchim. That's the true book. He was a philosopher. And he just wrote the halachic stuff, for the regular Jew, the less educated Jew, how to live their life. But that wasn't really what he cared about. What he was really was a philosopher. Meanwhile, the Rabbanim said, no. The real Rambam was the Rambam of the Mishnah Torah, which he wrote when he was younger. That's the real book. And that book of philosophy, he just wrote for people who were questioning God, who weren't sure. It wasn't really what he cared about. He just wrote it for them. And you know what? In my opinion, both are wrong. Until you understand it's the same man with the same heart, but with a great breadth, you don't understand the Rambam. The connection between philosophy and halacha, between the thought and the practice. Until you understand that it's the same person, you don't understand the Rambam. And it's the same with Rabbi Sachs. People don't know how halachically competent he was. Rabbi Novich, who taught him, made him learn hundreds of tshuvot, the sponsor, by heart. Rabbi Sachs, it was much harder than his time in Cambridge University. The halachic, but like this, Rabbi Novich, and I'm the head of the college, so I know, Rabbi Novich only gave semicha to 3 people his entire time that he was at Jews College. It was a very difficult semicha, and Rabbi Sachs knew it inside out. It's on my shelf. I looked at it this morning. Rabbi Sachs, when I was learning for my semicha, I said, what book did you use? And he gave me these wonderful svarim, which really help understand halacha, with little meticulous notes all down the side. He went through the whole thing. And not despite, but he was a great philosopher. And he saw the connection between those two worlds. He did what is a very rare thing. He achieved integration, a holistic vision. It doesn't mean he didn't struggle. It doesn't mean he wasn't restless, but he could start in one place and come to another. It was a complex, holistic vision that he had. And whatever he began teaching, eventually it would move to other issues. It's an incredible, incredible thing. And it's so sad that the Seder that he passed away was so meaningful with the Seder Va'era, because the Seder Va'era has Avraham Avinu in our model in it. And it has in the story 2 contradictory things. The most famous example of following HaKadosh Baruch Hu without question, to obey, is the Akedah, the end of the Seder Va'era, where Avram said, yes, got up early to do what HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, possibly even harming his child, his beloved child. That's one story of following, of listening, of obeying without question. And yet the most famous story of challenging HaKadosh Baruch Hu, HaShofet Kol Haaretz Lo Yaseh Mishpat, or the judge of all the earth, not do justice, said Abraham challenging HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, well, I hide it from Avraham. Will I hide from Avraham what I'm planning to do? And Avram argued with God, not just once, but over and over again. And even when it went down to 10 people and Avraham lost, it says he got up the next morning and stood there and said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if you're going to destroy them, you're going to have to do it facing me. And the Sephorah says, maybe even though Midat Hadin has been decided, just as judgment has been decided, maybe you'll still have Rachamim. That's the biggest example of someone challenging God. Yes, Yonah ran away, but Avraham stood his ground and challenged HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Which is Avraham? Why did he challenge in Sodom and Gomorrah and accept without question in the Akedah? And more incredibly, they're in the same Seder. The Seder we read last Shabbat, Va'era. That's how it begins. It begins with the Storm and Amar. He's questioning and challenging in one. He's seeking, he's searching, he's trying to hold God to the highest standard. And the second one, when it's even more personal, he says nothing. Is that a contradiction? No, it's the same Avraham. There is a time, there is an understanding of when to follow Kadosh Baruch Hu and when to challenge. And it takes the wisest of people to know when and to know how. It's only a contradiction if you think tefillin are a contradiction. Because when I put on tefillin, I have a shel rosh and a shel yad. And the shel yad, the action, what I have to do, has one box with one text in it. And I follow and I do with my shel yad. But the shel rosh has lines, has 4 different texts, 4 different competing opinions in the head. We understand and analyze, because in the shel rosh, you can question and analyze. When it comes to action, you have to do and follow HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Rabbi Sachs did both. He always did the right thing, what was needed to be done. What was needed to be done. But he also thought and he questioned and he challenged and he looked and he helped. And because he was a searcher, because he was trying to find the depths of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to feel HaKadosh Baruch Hu closer than his own self his entire life, we got to go on the journey with him. And so many people who had questions, who wouldn't talk to any other Rav, would say, Rabbi Sachs, him I listen to. Because they felt that seeking inside him. They knew that he was open to the world, that he was looking for a deeper understanding of Kadosh Baruch Hu. And he would share and say, this is what I found, come with me. Let me show you what I found. And he could deepen, as a result, the spirituality of all of us. That was his incredible gift. There was no contradiction between Professor Jonathan and Rabbi Sachs. That's what made him so great, as the Rambam was. It's incredible. You list the greatest books of each era, and we'll only define that it was the Rambam who did that. And you can only be the truest, deepest halachist if you're a philosopher, if you're a Baal Machshava. And you can only be a truly deep and great philosopher if you know halacha. That unification is so rare. It's so rare in our people. And I miss him. But thank God, in this modern world of 21st century, we have videos and we have audios and we have essays and we have the books on all different levels, some written for the general world, some written for the average Jew like you and me, and some written for Chachamim to read and understand. And find the book that's right for you and begin to read. And I promise you, it will be a treat, because he's so excited about his ideas to share with you that it wakes your mind up, and it makes you want to keep the mitzvot, and it makes you want to daven, and it makes you understand more. And ultimately, as Rabbi Dweck said, brings us all closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rav Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, is with HaKadosh Baruch Hu now, and we down here are closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu because of him. And I'll remember him every day of my life. Thank you very much.
Thank you. During the funeral of Rabbi Sachs, there were different eulogies delivered, and one of them was delivered by Rabbi Lionel Rosenfeld. And when he spoke and when he sang at the funeral, he brought me to tears. Rabbi Rosenfeld was a very long-standing friend, colleague of Rabbi Sachs, and together they were able to inspire so many people through singing, through the Shabbaton choir. And I'd like Rabbi Rosenfeld to share with us different thoughts of Rabbi Sachs. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Dr. Yeshud Moreno Morad Asra. Thank you for inviting me. I remember when I enjoyed a Shabbat in Hale, and it came Shabbat morning to your minyan. I so enjoyed the liveliness and the beauty and the melody, and it would always stay with me. So thank you for asking me to this evening. You must understand, and welcome. Hello, everyone. It's a very difficult week for me, and I have been asked to speak a few places. I haven't really distilled my words as beautifully as Rabbi Rafi has, and of course, Rabbi Dweck. But you have both, the previous speakers both hit the mark amazingly well. Rabbi Dweck talked about the Amal HaTorah, the many hours that Rabbi Lord Sachs had to spend to give us his learning. So many hours. And I can tell you that he was the most amazing organizer of his day, because he still had time in his day to answer questions, either by writing letters, or by speaking on the phone. He still had time every Friday morning or Motzei Shabbat in the winter to give me a call and many others. How's your week been? How are you doing? How was Shabbat? He had time for every person. He was able to come down to our level and bring us up to his. And that is such a unique ability. Now, I spoke on Sunday from the heart to my chaver, and many of you might have seen that, because when I rushed over there on Motzei Shabbat to see his wife, Lady Elaine, she did say, the first thing she did say was, speak for us, speak as a friend for us. And so when I spoke, I may have been given and honored with the title of Rav, but I didn't speak as a rabbi. I spoke as someone who had known him most of my life. And I said there, I don't know if you noticed, I was his madrich in Bnei Akiva. I mean, can you believe that? I was his madrich and he was the chanich. And the roles were totally reversed after that. I learned at his feet. And so, but when he was a chanich, he was much more quiet. He did not exhibit all that passion, because as Rabbi Rafi rightly said, this came to him much later. It came to him after 67. I too took that Greyhound bus a couple of years earlier, but I didn't get to see the Lubavitcher Rebbe as he did, who inspired him for the rest of his life. And Rabbi Sachs remained a Lubavitcher, though you would not have noticed in the style of his dress or his nusach of tefillah, but he remained in his soul a Chabadnik. And that's why at the end of my hesped, I had to sing the song that meant most to him and what he said he wanted to have as his epitaph. Tzam'a lecha nafshi. My soul thirsts for you. And after I sang that, do you know, I've had about 200 messages from around the world, most from people I don't know, but many Chabad rabbis suddenly have written to me, Rabbi Rosenfeld, you are a true Chabadnik. Well, I'm not, but to be felt that I did something that inspired them is good. When I spoke, how was it he had time for everything? I've seen his answers. They were long, they were written long, but he never failed to answer anybody who asked him a question. And it was incredibly how he did. But there's, of course, there's bittersweet humor. I'm thinking now of some of his answers. He was so humorous. He was so on the ball with his humor. I don't know if you know, he just moved to Israel, a good friend of mine, Edward and Joanna from North Manchester. And he wrote to me yesterday. He said, I recall when I stayed with you over Shabbat, we had put on a Friday night dinner in Rabbi Sachs' honor after he'd retired as Chief Rabbi. And they asked to come down and spend Shabbat with us for that. It was a tremendous weekend. And I always made sure on Shabbat that Rabbi Sachs had a copy of the Times. He stayed in the guest apartment in our building. He always had a copy of the Saturday Times in case he needed to comment on a national or international issue that suddenly had come up. So and I always made sure. But on Friday night, Rabbi Sachs asked me, have you got a copy of the Jewish Chronicle? I need to see it. And I said, no. So Edward said, Rabbi Sachs, you can have my copy, but it's the Manchester edition. Rabbi Sachs replied, well, if it's the Manchester edition, I'm not sure I'm from enough to read it. That was the sort of remark he would make. Never, ever against anyone. As I said, I never heard a word of Lashon Hara in all the hours that we spent, and we spent vacations together. Always true to his Torah. And he was in that way incredible. It was in 1990 when the year before he became Chief Rabbi, he was still Rabbi of the synagogue at Marble Arch. I had joined 2 years earlier as Chazan. we worked together so seamlessly. And one Shabbat, there were many guests in synagogue because we were at the center of town, of course, you can understand, from all over the world, mainly Israelis, but many Americans. And one Shabbat, there was an American family, and they were sitting in the front, very nice guy with two young, and we called him up as Kohen, and he had two young boys, 8 and 11. I know the age because he wrote to me on Monday. And what he wrote to me is, do you remember? Well, of course, I don't remember him, but he said, I remember that Shabbat. It was 1990, we were there, and you were taking the Torah back to the Aron HaKodesh at the end of reading it, you know, Hodo al Eretz v'Shamayim, and I was singing it. Rabbi Sachs was behind me, and I looked around, and Rabbi Sachs had stopped. And he told me, this guy is from Philadelphia, he said, Rabbi Sachs stopped with me, and he said, hello, where are you from? And what's your name? Speaking to the two boys. And then they told him, and he said, well, afterwards at the Kiddush, come up to me. I've got some chocolates for you. And he wrote to me as follows. He says, my sons are in their 30s now. They have never forgotten the chocolates that they received from Rabbi Sachs. They have all his books. They read his Friday night Covenant and Conversation every week, and they teach it to their children. Now that was Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs. He went down to everyone, and he brought everyone up into his orbit. And those two boys are just one of thousands that he influenced in that way. You know, as I said, I've had so many messages, and I could go on and speak so much. But a typical, another message that I received, actually, I'm not going to go into it because I don't have time, but I want you all, please, to look at this week's Covenant and Conversation that Rabbi Sachs has prepared for Chayei Sarah. It is absolutely prophetic, and it leaves you with your stomach absolutely drawn in. What does he say? I'll take two quotes. All great change is the work of more than one generation, and none of us will live to see the full fruit of our endeavors. He's gone so quickly. And then he says at the end, leaders see the destination. He was talking of Avraham Avinu. Leaders see the destination, begin the journey, and leave behind them those who will continue it. And that is enough, he says, to endow a life with immortality. Rabbi Sachs, in my way, in my vision, is immortal. And as Rabbi Zarum, Rafi, you said so beautifully the other day, never say that Rabbi Sachs said. Say that Rabbi Sachs says, is saying. Because as you just said, there's so much of him in social media, and we will be able to teach our children, our grandchildren, and even our great-grandchildren from all the amazing work that he did. And never forget to read the introduction to his Machzorim on every festival, on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Every one is a wealth of original thought that you will never find anywhere else. Look, I'm biased. I've known him most of our life. I had the great honor of working with him. And after he became Chief Rabbi, we worked together on so much. And of course, remember his love of music. As he always said, that music is comes from the soul. It's the language of the soul. He loved music, and he loved the Nusach HaTfilah, and he loved, and that's why we worked together so well. We worked off each other. I don't mind saying that we learned from each other. I learned 90%, he learned 10%, but it was still mutual. And I will never be able now to go more than 1 or 2 days without thinking of him. It's absolutely impossible. There was another, and I want to end just with a typical remark that has come from all the people who have written to me today and yesterday and the day before. And this is, his loss is a devastating one. He was exemplary as a rabbi, a leader, a thinker, a friend, and a mensch. May his memory be a bracha an inspiration to us all. Yehi zichro baruch. Tehei nishmato tzuro b'tzoach hayim. May his soul be bound in the bond of everlasting life. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. I'm going to thank all the speakers for the heartfelt words. I'm going to finish with the hashkava. I'd like everyone to please be upstanding. We do the special hashkava for distinguished rabbis. והחוכמה מאין תימצא ואיזה מקום בינה אשרי אדם מצא חוכמה ואדם יפית תבונה מה רבצוך שצפנת ליראיך פעלת לחוסים בך נגד בני אדם מה יקר חסדך אלוהים ובני אדם בצל כנפיך יחסיון ירביון מדשן ביתך ונחל אדניך תשכם טוב ישם שמן טוב ויום המוות מיום היוולדו סוטו הכל נשמע את האלוהים ירא ואת מצוותיו שמור גזעי כל האדם יעזו חסידים בכבוד ינוע משכבותם מנוחה נכונה בישיבה עליונה תחת כנפה שכינה במעלת קדושים טהורים כזוהר הכימים מזהירים בחילוץ עצמים והחרפת אשמים והכרת פשע והקרבת ישע וחמלה וחנינם לפני שוכן מעונה וכולה כתבה לחיי העולם הבא שם תמנת ומחיצת בישיבת נפש השם הטוב כבוד הרב רבי יעקב צבי בן דוד אריה סקס רוח חמני תנחנו בגן עדן ובכל בני ישראל השוכבים עמו בכלל רחמים וסליחות וכן יהי רצון ונאמר אמן. I'm going to now close the meeting. Remind those who are able to at 8:40 there is the shiur with Rabbi Kedar, but we're going to first close this Zoom down and people can re-log in a few minutes time. Again, thank you so much for all the speakers, Rabbi Rosenfeld, Rabbi Dr. Raphael Zarum, Rabbi Dweck, and also Rabbi Levy for his video and for inspiring us. Bezrat Hashem will be able, through our own actions, continue the message of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. Thank you.
Toda.